Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Talk to Brazil, a leading business podcast, talks with business experts throughout the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, an American known as the King of Networking, connecting people from my studio in Brazil. And today's guest is Renata Thiébaut, a digital transformation and e-commerce operation expert. She's joining us again from Shanghai, China. Renata Thiébaut is the COO and B2G Relations at Green Proposition Consulting. The company is headquartered in the United Arab Emirates. They're providing B2G solutions for digital transformation, small medium enterprise empowerment, and e-commerce solutions for e-commerce operations. She's also author of the book Alibaba Behind the Curtains, and that's available on Amazon. Renata, in the book you talk about backstage stories of the largest e-commerce company in the world. And one of the phrases that you use to us is, are you feeling overwhelmed by the challenges of running your business? So what do you bring to us that's backstage, and what can we learn from that?
First of all, I would like to start by thank you to welcome me, and it's been a pleasure talking to you and discussing for all of these years. And I would like to highlight that the book, Alibaba Behind the Curtains, brings about my story of working with several foreign companies entering the Chinese market through Alibaba platforms, the marketplaces, Tmall and Taobao, for instance. Mm-hmm. And I share my experience, the struggle. So companies that want to explore the Chinese market, they do not face the same issues as these companies face. So it is more of an approach that adopted by sharing experience, what to do, what not to do in the Chinese market.
And to that experience, and for our listeners, I have interviewed you on Talk to Brazil several times. I've interviewed on my Portuguese podcast, BB and Brazil, several times. For our listeners, Renata is Brazilian. She's lived in China for, I don't know how many years.
16 now.
Yeah, and you were one of the leaders in taking Brazilian products to the Chinese market. And this was years ago. So you were a grassroots person for business development and for cultural understanding years ago when this was an afterthought for many companies. So you really, and also to Alibaba, you actually saw behind the stage even before they had a stage.
Exactly, from the operational aspect, right? Because Alibaba is an ecosystem made of the logistics branch, the marketplace, the online payment, and the agencies that will run the online business of the Chinese and foreign brands in the country. So having this day-to-day experience was very helpful to build my career in e-commerce. And, China is at least 5 years ahead of the European market or the American market. Right. And perhaps 10 to 15 years of the Brazilian market as well. So this experience is very helpful, not only within the Chinese market to help these foreign companies and SMEs to enter China, but also to bring this experience from the China perspective and how to improve e-commerce landscape in Latin America, in Europe, and across the globe. And this is what I've been doing recently with different governments on how to help them digitalize the economy and to invest more into e-commerce and cross-border e-commerce infrastructures.
But to that point, when you first started, let's say years ago in China, all countries in the world, the business is made up of small companies, all right? We generally focus on the large companies because they capture the headlines. But even China, many family-run, many small companies. And what we've seen and felt, and you've talked about that before, the digital transformation actually helped those small companies, all right, the mom and pop type stores, actually structure themselves and adapt technology long ago so that they, as a company, first could not only survive but thrive. And that's the platform needed everywhere else.
Not only that, there was a huge transformation in the rural areas in China. With e-commerce and obviously the role of the local governments, the marketplace in China being them Alibaba, JD, Pinduoduo, Tencent, all the big internet giants, they contributed for infrastructure building in the countryside by providing training capacitation to farmers so they could sell directly to the final consumers. What we call from farm to fork, without having
farm to fork, right?
without having to ship their products to a center warehouse in a big city in China and then to be distributed to the final consumer. Then through live commerce and through e-commerce, they could sell directly to the final consumers.
Right.
So, and this business has grown a lot. It generates millions of dollars even per month. And it gives a lot of opportunities, not only to the farmers, but also to reduce migration in China. Because since you have more job opportunities, higher salaries, better opportunities in the countryside, now the youth, they will decide to stay in the countryside without and not moving to big centers like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, for instance.
Well, you can clarify this for us because obviously what you mentioned, the rural aspect of China, that's very similar to Brazil. That's similar, I'm sure, to Africa, other countries. But in the infrastructure that you mentioned, we tend to think of airports and high-speed trains and ports. But I think much of that started from a basic need for communication and then installed, because everything's a handheld device today. And you see that, China, everybody has everything in their hand. And I think that's pretty much anywhere in China. Is that true?
It is true. China is very developed in this regard. Even the elderly, they do use smartphones, and there is still this gap between digitalization in China and, let's say, Brazil or other developing countries. So the society still needs to be more digitalized, especially in the rural areas, for this to happen. But it is something we really cannot run away. It will happen eventually. So it's better for developing countries to have all of the elements in place when this happens, or even for the government to facilitate digitalization in remote areas, and understand that e-commerce can be a tool for digital transformation in the country. And we have seen so many impacts and positive impacts regarding industrialization, e-agriculture, also innovation in the countryside, job creation, etc. So the digital economy nowadays cannot be denied by any country.
No, and I agree with you. But again, to the point, the infrastructure, if you have the infrastructure, one thing, you have it and it works. So you have a handheld device, you can turn it on, you have access to Wi-Fi. You may not want to use it, but it's there. We have situations, Brazil, Africa, other countries, where you don't have the basic infrastructure. You may have, from the part of the farmer, from the farm to fork, you have the farmer wanting to use, to have access, but it's not available.
That's why the role of the big internet players is very important, because they do have the know-how, they do have the infrastructure. It is about them not concentrating their infrastructure or their business capabilities to their own gains. It's about sharing and giving back to the society, joining forces with local governments to develop programs that, yes, will benefit their growth, because in the end, these farmers can use their marketplace, the platform to sell their products, but also to for the local governments and the farmers to utilize their logistics, their existing infrastructure in more remote areas as well.
And for our listeners, what you say, providing the B2G solutions, that is business to government.
Yeah, government plays an important role to provide these companies and local governments with directives to show them the importance of investing to the digital economy. And then local governments, they are the basic, they form the base of the pyramid
Right.
to help this development as well, because you can start with a project, for example. You do not need to implement such an initiative throughout the country. You could choose a village or a small town in Brazil, let's say, and then test the market and see the growth. If the project is successful, then you can replicate it to other states. So that's how China does. And I do believe that it is not about copy and paste what China has done successfully, but rather learning from China, adapting to the reality of developing countries and developing similar programs as well.
No, and then we jump to green proposition. And I see on the site where you show the green proposition joins hands to expedite digital transformation of developing countries. So really, green proposition is taking basically everything you just said and directing that outwards. And the outwards is the Middle East, the outwards is Africa, the outwards could be Brazil, could be anywhere. So it's taking a working concept, a successful working concept, and helping others learn how to use it. Is that correct?
It is correct. Through the analysis of different markets and the needs of especially SMEs, we identified one single issue that small companies face in Oman, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Southeast Asia, anywhere in the world. Lack of knowledge.
And then to
Simply
that point,
put.
and back to the farmer. We're talking with the farmer, but is the rural person. And what you mentioned, and I agree with you, the younger generation, if they have something to do wherever they live, they would rather stay and do it where they are. And so this part of the immigration. In Brazil, we've seen that. We know that. Where everybody came either Sao Paulo, Rio, to the southern portion, the northern, northeast, Amazon, has really been deprived of part of what I would call the future, because the youth has been leaving constantly, really coming here, coming south, coming anywhere. But to fix that and have them stay, and we've seen positive examples even here in Brazil of startups having access to technology and handheld devices that actually work and electricity, starting up. Small-sized companies have become very, very successful.
But sometimes technology is also expensive. It is not an easy task for a startup to invest into technology. So that's why if you have a combination of forces between governments, local governments, and different internet companies as well, it will help also to innovate, to develop more technologies. I can give you an example of Pinduoduo. Pinduoduo is the third largest e-commerce company in China, and they focus on different programs with farmers in China. Right, so they also partnered with different educational institutions, universities, to develop algorithms to use computer science and technology to help the farmers in two ways. One is by reducing the usage of water, and by understanding the cycle of the production, when they would need to use more or less fertilizers, right? And developing new ways to produce more efficiently in a less time-consuming way with less waste. So
So really
it is
embracing sustainability in its full meaning.
exactly. Exactly. So they are extremely successful in this regard, especially transforming the agriculture in China. JD, Alibaba, Tencent, they do have similar programs, but I believe this one from Pinduoduo is outstanding.
Well, and from the academic standpoint, which you mentioned, you are also part of the academia in China. You have been for a long time. So you've seen that from both sides of the desk, right? Not saying initially as a student, but also as a teacher of involving understanding and transmitting this learning. And transmitting learning in today's global world, it has the multicultural component. Because one thing we sort of understand about where we are and in the language that we speak, but to get that out into this real world today, it's not only a language, it's really having the understanding of how do you transmit that, what are your feelings for people.
The role of a professor nowadays is to help the students, first of all, to have a real life experience. Mm-hmm. It's not about the books anymore. It's about on how we can help them to think outside of the box, to enhance the creativity, to change the mindset. Because after they leave school, they are going to be our future talents, right? They are going to
hopefully. No, our success depends on them.
Exactly. So they work for a company, or many of them now, they want to have their own startups. Right. They want to have their own companies. So it's important for us as professors. I am a professor of bachelor, master's, and MBA students at Gisma University of Applied Science here in Germany. And I always focus on that. I always try to bring them this e-commerce experience that I had, not only working with big companies like Aldi Supermarket, Metro Supermarket, name it, but especially working with small companies. Right. Because that's the beauty of business. That's how we manage to help these small companies to succeed and then to see that they are doing well in other countries. For big companies, it is much easier because of budget, because of knowledge, and for the smaller ones, it's
well, I want to say I agree with you, but I disagree. It's easier. But
back
to the people side. When we see big companies, we see a company, and I would say we don't see people. When we talk about small business enterprises, the startup, we see the person, we see the individual. We look in their eyes, right? We know, we can know them, and they need to be known. Sometimes big companies have gotten so big they're impersonal.
Exactly, but now they do have the resources to hire good talents, right? And a small company sometimes is just one person. I will give you an example. I have a client. She was a former student. She is extremely, extremely talented. She is a designer. And everything she does is with care. Apparels, silk made, she draws everything. All she needs to succeed is guidance. Because she does not know the business. She is extremely knowledgeable and talented in terms of designing, in terms of, working with colors, the drawing. She's very good at that. But she needs to be guided to be able to launch her brand, to sell online, how to promote your brand, to do marketing, to build the storytelling. And sometimes it's also very heavy for a one-person company or 5 people company to do all of that, right? Because we know selling a product is like a puzzle. You need to have all of the pieces in place to make sure that the brand will succeed.
And those pieces could be different. They need to be adjusted to the culture.
Exactly, you have this challenge also. In her case, she really wants to export to China. She wants to start her cross-border e-commerce store, also on Alibaba, to start selling to Chinese consumers. And yes, there is this barrier. She needs to understand what are the colors, the patterns, the sizes that Chinese consumers prefer. There is also the language, cultural barriers any company needs to tackle and to assess before entering a foreign market.
Well, you mentioned this person, one client, but for our audience, you have helped dozens, if not hundreds, of very well-known, named, famous persons who were famous in their country of origin. You've helped them actually enter the Chinese market, following exactly what you just said, of taking who they are, what they're good about, and adapting that culturally. And that recipe for success needs to be replicated everywhere else in the world.
But there are many cases also of failure. Even with a famous artists from the US, for instance, Hollywood artists. I've worked with Taylor Swift, for example, with Magic Johnson, with Kobe Bryant before, Jennifer Aniston, so many artists. But the problem is that sometimes if you just replicate the same strategy you have in the American market or in the European market, and you do not adopt it to China, it tends to fail. And we have so many cases with Marks and Spencer, Forever 21, very big companies, global companies, simply because they did not adapt their strategy.
Well, that's the same. You're talking China, but same thing here in Brazil. How many times have I heard that? Well, that works there, but it won't work here. And to some point, it's true. It won't work if you don't adapt it. Even Brazilians they have receptors that function in a different way. Africans, we're talking about Africa is one thing. It's not. It's a series of different countries, each with various languages, and have their needs to be adjusted to. And that's the next frontier, I think, for everybody. But it's the process of how we do that, how you should do that. And I tend to say that even here to Brazilian companies, the Brazilian companies tend to look to the big market. They're looking to the States, they're looking to Europe, but many of them aren't even structured for that. And so there are, the world's full of small markets where you can become a success. Even China's not one thing. It's a lot of small things put together.
There are many Chinas inside of China.
So just cut a slice of the pie and go, right?
Exactly. But sometimes it's about lack of resources or lack of knowledge. There are many factors involved. Each case is a different case, is an individual case we need to analyze and understand the reality also of the company. We cannot just impose a recipe and give a standard recipe. That's how that's what you need to implement before entering a new market. It does not work like that.
Well, and I take it that's your green proposition, right? You've understood that, you know that, you transmit that. And so you want to help companies, small, medium, large, anywhere in the world. You're not Chinese focused, you're not, don't say you have a focus, you have a business focus.
Yeah, a global business focus, because cross-border e-commerce, for example, facilitates business. If you are in Germany, for instance, and you want to buy a product from the US or from China through AliExpress, now Shein, the big platform from China that is very successful abroad, you can get your products within 4 days, right? So we are in an era of globalization. So companies also need to globalize. So instead of just selling to the population of a certain country, why not selling globally? And that's why e-commerce brings them this opportunity to explore different markets. So I've been working with the United Nations, for example, with countries like Oman, to show them that there is a lot of opportunities. Of course, in some cases now with Africa, I have a publication with the UN. I have delivered some training also to UN officers in this regard on how to leverage from cross-border e-commerce through regulations, simplified regulations,
Right.
taxation also, to boost the economy, in this case of African countries, because now the free trade agreement in Africa with 54 countries will give more opportunities to these small companies, right?
So it's a complete learning process because it's not just it's the operations of going from point A to point B, but it's also
Yes,
about how to form a company, how to maintain it. We're talking about compliance, regulations that are becoming more common across the board globally, right?
because international organizations and governments, they know the policies, but they do not have the knowledge of day-to-day operations on how to help the companies, what's needed to support them from the operational perspective. So having this knowledge from the public sector, also in my case, the academic part and the private sector, is very important, and that's what has helped me in this regard in the past few years for me to position as an expert in digital trade globally.
Well, that's good. So it's for the small business person not to feel overwhelmed, is to feel that help is available. And that's not only through your book, Alibaba Behind the Curtains, it's through Green Propositions, through following you on what you make available in posts and articles, and it's called free information about what we just talked about. So there's a lot of help out there. And digitally, you can find it more readily and more easily than years ago.
Definitely. Digitalization is not only for big companies, small companies, startups, and individual also can sell online. Nowadays, it's very easy. There are many tools available, many platforms. All they need to do is to gain knowledge on how to use them in their favor.
Great. So this recent strengthening of the BRICS, we talk about Brazil, China, the Middle East, Africa that we mentioned here, how do you see that moving forward?
I do have hopes with the BRICS more than before, let's say, because especially between Brazil and China, I think the relations will benefit a lot, not only from trade, but also for investments and in other, especially science technology sectors. Lula just paid a visit to Xi Jinping to China last week. It was a very successful meeting. Regarding other BRICS countries, there is still a friction between India and China regarding border and some conflicts.
Right.
But I do believe that both countries and all of the BRICS countries need each other. So it is for their own benefits to join forces to promote investment, to invest into infrastructure. And the role of the BRICS Bank now will not focus only on benefiting the BRICS countries. We do have more and more members joining the BRICS Bank. Now under, it was Marcos, now is Ms. Dilma's presidency. So Brazil is now in the presidency of the bank. And I am looking forward to see more coming from the BRICS and also to other countries. That is not only for these 5 countries.
So things look positive.
Very positive.
And we look out into this world. The world is full of the farms and the world is full of forks. So the more we can go farm to fork, the better off it is for everybody, right?
Right, especially in developing countries, there is a lot to learn from China, what China is doing, not being biased, but China can serve as a role model for these countries But I can tell you, even in Europe, sometimes I can see that China is way ahead in terms of digitalization. We are talking about a country like Germany, right? We would believe that Germany is one of the most developed or
Right.
digitalized countries in the world, and it's not. Sometimes I really can see a clash or a shock even from my side to see that yes, China is much more developed in terms of digitalization of government services, of transportation, etc.
Well, even
So
here
we
in
can all
Brazil,
learn
I
from each
saw
other.
that here because, Brazil became one of the first, let's say, cashless societies. Everybody was using the different mechanisms for payment. So actual cash transactions, which are still common in many places out there in the world. The United States still depends on money. And then the move towards cashless, Brazil has become basically cashless.
With
The
the
credit card
PICs
as a credit card is it sounds like it's obsolete, but
is
it's the
obsolete.
handheld device that's used for payments.
Yeah, I do believe that the government's program to launch the PICs was extremely successful.
Right.
I really see Brazilian companies and individuals only using PICs.
Yeah, no, and it is. And since I'm here, you can see that I rarely use currency. Sometimes you have it, but there's no place to use it. And when somebody does pull out a bill, when you look at the money, they're not really sure what to do with it anymore.
To your surprise, I can tell you, I still use coins in Europe.
Well, no, and everywhere in the
I haven't
States and
seen
many
the
other
PIC.
countries they do, but that's back to your point of some places
Yeah,
can be more digital than we think, and others where we think they're the benchmark they aren't. So there's room for improvement all around, right?
right.
Well, Renata, I want to thank you again for sharing your vast experience with us, and we hope to have you back again. But how can our audience, how can our listeners find you?
You can reach me out through LinkedIn. I am very active on LinkedIn. My name is Renata Thiébaut. It's very easy to find me there. Maybe some spelling issues with my surname, but yeah, you can check also Tom's account and follow me on LinkedIn. And my website is www.greenproposition.com.
Very good. Well, thanks again, and we'll be talking soon, I'm sure.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
Thank you. And for our listeners, again, it's Renata Thiébaut. It's Renata. The last name is Thiebault. Thiebault.
There,
Find her.
there is no L. There is
I'm
no L.
I'm sorry. Let me do that. Thiebaut. My
Exactly.
mistake. One more time. Thiebaut. Find her on LinkedIn and also on greenproposition.com. And the book, Alibaba Behind the Curtains, available on Amazon. Right?
Right.
Thank you again.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specialize in the market research for Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their site, focusmi.com. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.